You're listening to The Sound of Pursuit. I'm Hal Humphreys, your host. Ben Lopez is the owner of Verify Investigations in Chicago. He's a licensed private investigator with more than 25 years of investigative experience. He's also the owner of a fantastic backyard tiki bar, which we're going to hear a little bit more about later in this episode. It's relevant. You'll see. I do want to just throw a simple warning out there. We will be discussing some difficult topics. If you have children listening to the podcast, you might want to let them skip this one. We will be talking about self-harm and other tragic things. So just a fair warning to the listeners that we'll be talking about some difficult conversations. I do want to bring in Ben Lopez real quick. Ben, thank you so much for taking the time to be here today. It's good to see your face.
Good morning, Hal. It's a pleasure.
Tell us a little bit about your background. How did you get into this crazy world of private investigations?
Well, that's probably a whole nother show. But coming out of high school, I really didn't have a chance to attend college because my father died at a very young age. So college really wasn't something I was able to do. I held some odd jobs here and there, even a watch salesman. Eventually, I ended up working in a mid-sized personal injury law firm. And I was hired to do the mail, to sort the mail, make sure, open it up, make sure it got to the files, etc. 13 years later, I was drafting simple pleadings. I was skip tracing. The attorneys had really taken the opportunity to teach me anything that I wanted to learn. And I learned. And part of the job was contracting out service of process, locates, things that I really couldn't handle from the office. So, I just kind of figured I can do this. It's something I had always wanted to. I dreamed of it when I was a kid. I was a big fan of the Rockford Files, Mannix, the TV show Mannix, big fan. I kind of hit it off with the private investigator that the firm was using. An old school guy. Back then, we were using voters' registration records, property records, and if you were lucky, you had a diskette with some information on them. I'm sure you remember those.
Oh, yeah.
Well, he took me under his wing, and he taught me how to knock on doors, how to work the streets. Eventually, I ended up working. I left that job because, well, it really wasn't paying that much. And then I tried my hand at surveillance and got trained by MJM Investigations. I believe they were in North Carolina. I worked for them for a year. And all of my experience has been practical. If I wanted to learn about collections, I went to work in a collections law firm. If I wanted a law enforcement certificate, I went to the sheriff's department. I worked there for probably close to 10 years. And I was also an investigator for the city of Chicago. And the whole time, I still was conducting investigations on the side for myself as my own business. And finally, in 2010, I just decided that the time was right for me to go full time. And it's been nonstop ever since.
I love it. I love it. That is a fantastic origin story. And when you talk about the old television shows, I remember my grandmother used to stay up late on Friday nights and watch Rockford Files with me. She was a huge fan of James Garner, and we watched that show every Friday night together. I had the same daydreams as a kid, becoming a private investigator. Let me ask you real quick. You're a Chicago native, born and bred. How has that kind of informed your worldview as a private investigator, being from Chicago?
Well, I think when you work on the streets of Chicago, you learn a lot about different cultures. And it is important because, when you're working on the street and you're knocking on doors, learning about you have something to learn from everyone. if you don't take that view in this business, you're not going to last long. You have something to learn from everyone. So the population here is so diverse that you can learn I learned 20 new things every day.
I mean, at the end of the day, Ben, isn't that the job of an investigator, to learn things?
Absolutely.
I love it. Well, I want to talk real quick. You've got an article in Pursuit magazine, came out August 1st, "The Case That Haunts Me." You can find that for our listeners. You can find that at Pursuit magazine, pursuitmag.com. "The Case That Haunts Me." We private investigators like to talk about the cases we win. But this is a story about one that didn't go well at all. Set the scene for us. Chicago, July 4th weekend is almost here. A call comes in. Tell us what happens next.
Well, I received a call from a gentleman who he sounded pretty desperate. He was explaining to me that he was well-to-do. He was a local businessman, and that he was going to be married very soon. But he had some doubts about the young lady who he was engaged to. And he had those doubts because he was an older gentleman. She was young, attractive, and she had established a pattern of breaking off dates or disappearing. And he just wanted to make sure he was doing the right thing, maybe get a prenuptial or just break it off altogether. He just wanted to be sure about his relationship. I told him that it was July 3rd. There was nothing I could do. Chicago traffic is an absolute nightmare on July 3rd because of the fireworks display. Millions of people go downtown. It's very difficult to get around. And I kind of thought that's where this was going. And I was right. He told me that his fiance had abruptly canceled a dinner date and said she had to go visit her mother. And I told him there was nothing I could do. All I wanted to do at that point was go home. Yeah. I wanted to go be with my family, go be with my friends. But he was pretty persistent, and I felt bad for him. And I called my wife and I asked her, "What do you think? Should I do this?" And she said, "You're going to do it anyway. It's just your nature. Go ahead, do it, be safe, and, take care of yourself then." So I let the gentleman know that I would take the case on. I had to hurry back from the suburbs. I had to conduct some background checks on him, make sure there were no orders of protection, which I hope every investigator does whenever they take on a case like this. But I did my background on him. He turned out to be absolutely legitimate, businessman, wealthy, suburb of Chicago. Everything seemed on the up and up. I think from there, I believe I grabbed my equipment and I hurried out to the location where the fiance lived. And it really didn't take long at all. When I got there, I think maybe an hour in, something like that, she came walking out of her house. And young, attractive young lady, but she was carrying, shopping bags and folding chairs and a cooler, which is what got me. Why would you be taking a cooler to go visit your mother? And sure enough, I followed her. She went to a local liquor store, picked up some wine, some ice, and then headed to downtown Chicago, which scared me because now I know I'm going to lose her. But it was one of those cases, and I think every investigator has had one, a surveillance where you just can't believe that you were able to stay with the person. And that was the case. I was able to stay with her all the way to Chicago, through the traffic, to the festival, to the fireworks, and just watched a very public display of affection. Mm. And this was the part that I hate. So at the end of the night, I had followed her to the Paramour's address in downtown Chicago, and where they took it in for the night. Okay. So now I had to call my client, and I had to inform him of what was going on. And I hate that. I quit taking cases like this for this reason. But he was grateful. I kept him on the phone for a very long time, just trying to bring him down. I don't want to drop bad news and walk away. That's not my style.
Yeah.
So I kept him on the phone for a long time. And we talked about his business. We talked about family. We talked about a lot of things other than what we just witnessed. He was pretty grateful, and he told me, I told him I would have a report for him, first thing on Monday. And he said, no, I don't need a report. It's not necessary. And I said, no, every client gets a report. Whether maybe you don't want it, I'll keep it, but there's going to be a report done. So Monday morning, I did the report, and I believe Tuesday morning, I walked into the office, and the receptionist that was working told me that there was a police detective from the suburb where this gentleman lived. Now I knew something was wrong. My heart dropped. But I asked him in, and he asked how I knew my client. And I just told him he was my client. I did some work for him. And he said, what kind of work? I said, well, I can't really discuss that with you, unless you have a subpoena or a warrant, something. I'm not going to disclose anything.
Right.
There are privacy issues. And he said, well, does that still apply if he's dead? Felt it in my throat. And so he then told me that this gentleman's cleaning lady found him 2 days ago, and he had been found hanged. They said it was suicide. And I said, okay, well, this is the reason that I was working for him. And he said, well, the fiance said that she was visiting her mother. And I said, that's a lie. And I got angry. And I said, no, she was with a boyfriend. And he said, well, why would she lie? And I said, well, I don't know, but she's lying. And he said, well, I'm going to ask her. I said, you don't have to ask anything. Here is my report. And this is why everybody should have a report. So I placed the report down on the desk. He looked at it. He smiled, and he says, I'm going to talk to her again.
Yeah.
Eventually, I did hear back from him, and he told me that that she admitted that she lied. She was ashamed that while he was in the state he was in, she was off with someone else.
Yeah.
And, the detective kept me on the phone just as I had kept my client on the phone. And he was bringing me down from a situation and originally I kind of thought he was a jerk, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
But then I realized it was his method of working. And he took the time to make sure I was okay before he let me go.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which I really wasn't. But, some months later, the brother of the client had called the office and wanted to speak with me. And I wasn't sure if I wanted to pick up the phone or not. I didn't know what I had coming. Was he going to blame me, or what? Was he looking for answers? But I guess he had spoken with the detective who had investigated the death, and the detective let him know that how helpful I was and that I had spent time with his brother. And he just wanted to make sure that I was okay. he said he felt terrible knowing that I probably felt that I was the cause of his brother's death, but he really wasn't because my client, unknown to me, had a drinking problem, severe drinking problem. He was functional, but he had a drinking problem and he suffered from depression, and all of it came to a head, and we found ourselves in the position we were in.
Yeah. Ben, you said in the article, you said that it took you a long time, many years, to speak publicly about this case. Um, why is that? And why did you finally decide to write about it?
Well, I think, in my career with the city of Chicago, my career as a sheriff with Cook County, um, it became a practice of you place it deep inside and you just hold it in. That's what men do. I come from a very macho culture. That's what we do. We don't really talk about these things as much as we should. And my I have the most wonderful wife in the world. And I remember nights, Hal, when I would come home from work when I was with the sheriff's department, and I was absolutely banged up. My my hands were all scraped up. I smelled like pepper spray. And my wife never once asked what happened. She would just say, "Let me get you an ice pack," or "How do you feel, honey?" and rub my back. I never let this particular case out because for whatever reason, and I can't put my finger on it, this one case, I felt it the most. I had been around death before, and I wish I had an answer to tell you and say, this is the specific reason this case hurt me the way it did, and why I couldn't talk about it the way I wanted to.
Yeah.
And I felt it was time to talk about it because I finally had the strength to put it down on paper.
Yeah, and I think realistically, when it's time to process through something like this, for me, most often the process involves putting pen to paper and trying to get my thoughts organized on paper. Ben, I can't thank you enough for writing and sharing the story with Pursuit Magazine. We really appreciate it. Here's the thing: we private investigators tend to think of ourselves as strong and powerful, and we got this, and nothing really affects us. It's hard in this job to be a decent human being who cares about other people, and who isn't an egomaniac sometimes. Stuff gets to us, and I think I've said it before. Maybe it's not one specific case. Maybe it's an accumulation of traumas and grief over a career that one case just ticks it off, just ticks it over, the thing into it bothers you greatly. I had a case a couple of years ago that left me in a parking lot in a shopping center just north of Dallas, Texas, unable to stop crying. It was a particularly sad case. But I've developed this sense of myself that I can compartmentalize, and these things aren't my problems. But it does occasionally become a little bit overwhelming. You question yourself: is it worth it to be self-aware and to care? Does this make us better at our jobs, being caring, thinking human beings?
I absolutely think it does. I think that the moment we stop caring about the people that we profess to help, it's time to wrap it up. It's time to
Yes.
look for something else.
Yeah. Yeah. In reading your piece, the line that hit me the hardest was, I'm going to try and read this word for word. Most people do not understand what a bad day at the office means for people like us. How can we decompress after the sudden flashes of violence, the everyday tragedies and cruelties, and the cases gone wrong that stay with us forever. That's the line that hit me the hardest is people don't understand what a bad day at the office is for us a lot of the times. And when I had a client years ago that was on death row, had been convicted. There was literally a massive amount of evidence that he wasn't even at the place where the actual crime occurred. When he was executed, just the thought, I'd spent years working on that case with the post-conviction attorneys that were working on it. And when he was executed, it really just hit me. And, you know, sometimes you've got to have a place to decompress. For me, it's a physical spot. And I'm actually sitting in it right now. You can see that I'm in a pine walled cabin right now. This is my place to go kind of decompress and process through these things. Ben, I teased it a little bit at the top of the podcast, but how do you decompress?
Well, I have a variety of ways. I'm not going to sit here and tell you I'm the guy that works out every day. I'm just not. I do work out. I do keep myself semi-fit. I do pretty well for my age. But mostly family, my close friends who are my brothers, and I have found a lot of solace in gratitude. And this kind of goes hand in hand with the part about caring. And why I bring up gratitude, because I am able to have a dream job. This is a dream. I think I have never met an investigator who did not love what they do. I mean, this is, when you talk to people and they ask you, what do you do for a living? I'm a private investigator. The look on their faces, this is a dream job.
Yeah.
Not everybody can do it, but it is a dream job. And I am extraordinarily grateful for everyone in my life that made this possible. I didn't do this on my own. It started with those attorneys that took the time to give some kid a chance. It's all of the help I received along the way. I am so grateful, Hal. I wish I could convey that in a way that could be measured. I'm just grateful. And that's why part of the therapy for me is family, friends, gratitude. And that gratitude means doing some good in the world other than just the investigations. I like to help not-for-profits. I like to donate money. There's always something in your life to be grateful for. And I've been overly blessed.
I hear you, and I feel entirely the same way. And for listeners of the podcast and that have kind of watched it over the years, listened to it over the years, it's no secret that I am a yoga practitioner, and one of the things that I do with my yoga practice is take a moment in the morning to express gratitude for specific things. And I think that is, look, we've all got something that we can be grateful for. Taking the time to sit down and consider it and even sometimes say it out loud or write it down onto a piece of paper is incredibly important. I do want to get to the Tiki bar. You talk about friends and family. For me, coming here is a place to spend time with friends and family. We've got a custom-made grill table down here at the fire pit. We spend time. For me, Ben, I would rather sit at the grill or stand at the grill and prepare food for a group of people than just about anything in the world. And I'm guessing you with your tiki bar are pretty much the same way.
Yes. How one day my wife was in the backyard, and I walked back there to tell her that I was leaving for a surveillance. She had bits of wood out, and I mean, you have to know my wife. I mean, she's somebody that just goes and gets it. So she was working on something, and I asked her what she was doing, and she said, I'm making a bar. And I said, wonderful. Well, all these years later, we had this wonderful tiki bar. My home had already been kind of like the central meeting place for everyone because it was centrally located and it was very large. And my wife and her sister are very much the welcoming type. They cook, they love cooking, they love treating people, uh, serving them, and they pay attention to the little details like who likes what in their food and how to make certain people drinks. But it was really about the family and friends that were there. And to this day, we all get together as much as possible. We have we try to have men's dinners where the guys that I grew up with, and I've known some of them since I was 6 years old, and we're still very close. And we meet maybe once a month, or whenever we can. We have dinner, we have drinks, and that's when we really get to unload. We talk about things that we can't talk about in front of other family because sometimes it's what you and I just spoke about, or it's the burden that men carry so that their families don't. It's the best way to put it.
Yeah, I hear
So
you. I hear
we'll
you.
talk about that. We'll
Yeah.
talk about those things. But yes, the tiki bar, wow. All I can say is wow. But we do have our family parties. We love them, and that keeps me going.
Yeah, it's the chance to sit down with friends and talk about things about which we can't speak in polite company. And all of us private investigators have those stories. You just can't tell them in polite company, but you need to tell them. You need to share them with someone to get them off your shoulders. I think, Ben, I'm going to suggest right now, anyone who's a podcast listener to The Sound of Pursuit, take the time now to click over to Pursuit Magazine and read The Case That Haunts Me. We'll drop a link in the YouTube description just below this video for you to read. Ben, real quick, give me one takeaway private investigators can get from reading the story.
Reach out. If you are feeling stressed, if you are if your mind races, if you have anxiety, it's time to reach out. Talk to someone. Feel free to. I placed my phone number in that article. I will speak to anyone. It's so much better to reach out to someone than to either harm yourself or to carry that burden. You don't have to. There are people. There are people that are more than happy to speak with you.
Yeah, I think that's it. Reach out. That's the key takeaway. If you find yourself stuck in negative thoughts, ruminations, pick up the phone and call someone. Ben has been kind enough to include his phone number in the article on Pursuit Magazine. I have never been shy about sharing my contact information. I am almost always available to talk. 615-812-0116 is my direct line. If you find yourself in a spot where you feel like you just need to unload, reach out to Ben, reach out to me, reach out to someone to talk to about the situation. I think that's a fantastic takeaway. If you ever find yourself thinking about harming yourself in any way, call 988 and talk to somebody right now. We posted the warning at the top of this podcast that we're going to be talking about self-harm. Ben, I'm just actually talking about this. I worked on a case years ago where a friend of mine, her husband had committed suicide in her restaurant. And part of that case involved me. The police had cleared the scene. The cleanup crew had come in and done their job. But the police left the surveillance system in place with the video there. And the lawyer that I was working for asked me to go do two specific things. He said, I need you to take the DVR, number one, and I need you to verify that the video is the video. And I thought, yeah, I got this. And I watched the video to verify that it was, in fact, and it was one of the most disturbing things I've ever seen. And I remember not being able to get that scene out of my head, just it replaying in my head over and over. And Ben, I picked up the phone and called a friend of mine's wife who is a professional psychologist and scheduled some time with her to do some counseling sessions. Really hard thing for a southern redneck man to do. But I realized that I needed to talk to someone professionally about what I was having struggles with. So again, Ben Lopez, thank you so much for taking the time to be with me today. It's always good to see your face, always good time to spend time together. I'll give you a real quick tip. I'm going to be in Chicago, I think, in November. I'm going to give you a call. We're going to sit at the Tiki bar. We're going to drink a little bit, and we're going to tell stories. Ben, thank you again.
Sounds good, Al. Have a great day.
Cheers. And for those of you listening to the podcast, I'm Hal Humphreys, and that is the sound of pursuit.